Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Washington State Editor Brett Davis for the Center Square. Joining me today is the Center Square's Eastern Washington reporter, Timothy Schumann. I should explain that Tim is feeling a little bit under the weather today. I think your throat is on fire, if that is correct.
I did not get the best sleep last night. We'll go with that.
All right. And speaking of fires, you've written a lot about the fires in Spokane County this summer, but it looks like Spokane County might not be getting as much federal aid as anticipated regarding those recent wildfires. Can you explain why that is the case?
Yeah. So in a Spokane County Board of Commissioners briefing earlier this week, what happened is essentially the state authorities who have been tasked with partnering with, the Spokane County regional authorities to look over the damage, do assessments, and look at, various dollar amounts for cleanup, basically came back and said that none of the county dollar amounts, while, they were significant for a countywide, region, rose to the level that was required by FEMA at a state level to actually declare a public emergency.
And what is that threshold in dollars?
I believe they said it was around $13.5 million, if I remember correctly. What that means is without a FEMA public declaration of, an emergency, it cuts off entire avenues of funding from the federal government that would exist otherwise. And apparently, even though Spokane and Whitman County both rose to above the dollar amount required for their local regional disasters to be declared, it did not rise to the level that the state as a whole could be declared, disaster by FEMA and hence open up a bunch of public dollars.
Now, I understand there's basically two types of assistance. We're talking about public assistance and individual assistance. Can you differentiate between those?
Yeah, so public assistance is for things like you'd expect, public rights of way, basically anything you see in a, looking down a public right of way on a county road, you're going to see, the road itself, telephone poles, maybe termination boxes for internet or fiber cables or cable. All of that would be covered under, public right of way or public cleanup. Individual assistance is along the lines of if you are a property owner and you have an uninsured home, or you have, for instance, a lot of people have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of trees on their property that aren't insured. And that would fall under, individual assistance, things that are personal property, not on public land.
So in terms of the individual property or individual assistance, I should say, I understand there's some challenges there in terms of the number of homes that are uninsured versus homes that are insured.
Yeah. So unfortunately, FEMA is it's like the emergency backstop of disaster relief. It only covers things that don't already meet coverage in other areas. So if people do have private insurance for their crops, their trees, their structures, anything like that, all of those private avenues must be first exhausted, and then they must fall into an uninsured pool. And once they're in that uninsured pool, there needs to be a certain number of other people that are in that pool, and that also has to rise to a certain dollar amount. I'm not exactly sure what that dollar amount is, but I remember that Mr. McClain, who is the state regional emergency oversight guy, essentially said that currently, if Spokane County were to apply for individual relief through FEMA, the thresholds wouldn't be met as they only have 40 houses in their uninsured pool. And he said that to guarantee an application, they would need closer to 170 to 200 homes that were either a complete loss and completely uninsured.
I see he basically summed it up by saying that chances are, quote, probably slim, end quote.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because a lot of damage was done this fire season, and it's when a disaster like this strikes, it's kind of a you spend the money and you look for where you're getting the money from later. And as of current, really, there's only one pool of money they're pulling from, and that's state funds. The local and regional authorities didn't really have a backstop for a disaster of this magnitude. I believe, it was over 25,000 acres burned and, several deaths and hundreds of homes.
At least a little bit of good news. I understand FEMA has approved a 30-day extension for filing.
Yeah. So while it looks like the public assistance portion of the FEMA funds aren't going to happen, the individual assistance portion might. They're still at a data gathering point where they're looking into how many of the homes that they've collected data on are actually uninsured. Because, at this point, they have a pretty good idea of the homes and the structures that have been destroyed, but what they don't know is what avenues those private citizens have for insurance or for replacing them that can be exhausted before they can be put into this pool of individual assistance that FEMA may help out with.
All right. So I think according to your story, local authorities, they now have until October 21st to make their case for a disaster declaration for individual assistance.
Yeah.
A little bit of good news amongst the, I guess, comparatively bad news.
Yeah. And they're also the governor's proclamation late in August opened up a $1.25 million fund to help deal with cleanup efforts. But that fund, again, is, pretty narrow in scope of what it can be used for. I believe it was only 4 things, and it was all around cleanup and remediation of damages to make sure that, for instance, things like asbestos aren't washing into public waterways from, burned down structures.
All right. Well, thanks for keeping us updated on this. I imagine there'll be some more stories on this. Thanks for taking the time, even though I know you're not feeling tip-top today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Timothy Schumann, this is Brett Davis. Please subscribe, and thanks for listening.